Okay, people are joining. Wonderful, wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to Well Published Live. This is a production of my Substack, MFA Lore, and I'm your host, Aimee Liu. Talking today. I'm so happy to be here with literary agent Dara Kaye, who has an unusual specialty. She represents nonfiction only. Dara has been an agent with William Morris Endeavor since 2023. Her clients include New York Times bestsellers and winners of major awards, including Fulbright fellowships and National Endowment grants. Before joining William Morris, Dara was an agent and foreign rights director at the Ross Yoon Agency. She's a graduate of Smith College and University College of London, and she spent 2 years in South Korea on a Fulbright fellowship before starting her career. Dara lives and works from Washington, D.C., and I should just say that I've known her family since I was in kindergarten, so we really go a long way back. And I expect that your father's watching, so if you are, hi, Joel, from both of us.
I'll
I'm
save my
really,
dirty
really
jokes for another session.
right. Welcome, Dara. I'm so happy to have you.
It was such a pleasure to get the invitation. I'm excited to talk to you.
Great. Before we begin, I just want to remind everybody to put your questions in the chat. I am doing this from my laptop for the first time, and so I'm not exactly sure how it works, but I think I think I'll be able to see the chat somewhere here if you write messages. So let me see here. Okay, I'm just gonna hope it all turns up. Let's start with your personal journey, Dara, and how you found your way to agenting from South Korea.
Yeah. So my first foray into book publishing was in grad school, and I will spare you the details of the dissertation that led me to seek out an internship at Hachette UK, which is one of the big corporate publishers based in London. But I worked alongside some really terrific editors there and really enjoyed it. And ended up with I was there for several weeks in a couple of different departments, a couple of different imprints rather, and then ended up with a copy editing contract to continue working for them after that because while I was teaching English, I developed some skills that were applicable. So it was great, and I got to keep sort of doing that part time after I left, and I moved to DC after I was in London. And my supervisor from Hachette told me there was this great powerhouse boutique agency based in DC by this this legendary agent Gail Ross, who I've now been working with and for a long time, and to see if she was hiring. So I got a part-time job working at Ross Yoon, and I didn't really think of it as a career, as the beginning of a career. I thought of it as a thing I was doing while I was trying to decide whether to continue with an academic career and whether to continue on for a doctorate, and whether to do that in the UK where I had been studying, or to go get the doctorate in the US. And to their credit, the folks, Howard Yoon and Gil Ross, who are the Ross and Yoon of Ross Yoon, were very candid when they hired me that they were not looking to hire someone full time, that they weren't looking to expand the agency, but I could do this kind of work. And I
Were
think,
you an assistant there? What was the job actually?
yeah, I was an assistant for the agency, which
Mhm.
which is a role that is very different depending on what agency you're at. But they really let me roll up my sleeves and get in there. So I was editing proposals along with, looking through the query pile and handling mailings and all the admin stuff that comes with assistantship.
Mhm.
Um, so that was cool to really be able to get my feet wet. But I think they just got sick of hearing me hem and haw about the state of academia and how much I wanted to do it. And I have this vivid memory of sitting in Howard's office and relaying that this friend I had who had a doctorate from Princeton, an English literature doctorate from Princeton, and had two really coveted postdoc positions and still couldn't get a job, and just was thinking, oh, is this the path I really? And he kind of cut me off and was like, do you just want to work here? Like, do you want a real job? Do you want to just be in publishing instead of whatever that is? And I thought about it, and I'm still here, 10 years later. So I guess the answer was yes. I stuck around.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So whenever people ask me about my journey, or, I think young people will ask me, how do I break into the publishing industry? And, I wish I had like a paint by numbers linear path to offer them. But the truth is, it was like, get a degree in Renaissance literature and then flail until you land there somehow.
Right, right. And so you started when it was a boutique agency, and now you've shifted and you're working for William Morris. Is there are you finding from your end that there's a difference between a boutique and the big league?
Yeah. I mean, there's stuff that's the same across any industry. There's some stuff that's the same because I'm working in the same office. So I didn't switch jobs, but
Mm-hmm.
Ross Yoon grew and then later was acquired in 2023. We were acquired by WME and got folded into the books department there. And I didn't know what to expect, but it's actually been wonderful. And, some of it is being part of a bigger agency that now I don't have to research. If I have a client who wants to explore a new direction in a new format, I have colleagues who I can call. So when I had a client who said, my secret dream is to find a way to make a musical out of my book, where do I start? So I could say, let me call my friend Lizzie over in the theater department and have her talk us
Yeah.
through what that initial step would be. So that's been wonderful. And, but I'm in the same office. I'm in what was the Ross Yoon office, working with Gail and Howard still here. And then we added this wonderful array of agents who are based in New York and Nashville and LA. And I ask them questions about their own specialties all the time. So it's been great to have this kind of expanded brain trust about the
Hmm.
industry, about the genres they work with, about the editors they know. It's very cool. Yeah.
You flipping from the point of view of people who are submitting books, do you have any advice since you've been on both sides as to for a new author, especially somebody who's never been published before, if they're better off going, to a boutique or big deal agency? And this is an ongoing conversation for a lot of authors all the time, of course.
I think it's about, I think it's more about who the agent is and whether they get the book that you're trying to do, whether they have the angle of approach to help you do that. I mean, there are some people who are going to be better served at an agency that has multiple departments, and there are some
Mhm.
people where that just doesn't matter that much. So, I think I didn't grow up at WME, so um, I don't have like a dyed in the wool sense that bigger is always better. Bigger is sometimes better
Mhm.
if it meets the needs of the author. For the most
Mhm.
part, the way that I do business, the way that I support the people that I work with, the clients that I work with, is not all that different at WME than it was at Ross Yoon. Um, I think it's been wonderful to be able to upgrade some of the resources that I can offer, but that's not applicable to everyone in every circumstance.
Right, right, right. So the website says you represent adult fiction that tells great stories from serious history and memoir to pop science and parenting. What exactly does that mean in terms of specific titles and categories? For example, does it include journalism and reportage? Um, what's your wheelhouse
My
really?
wheelhouse. Okay, so I have a cheesy answer to this. Bear with me. I'm a millennial who lives in DC, so it's a West Wing reference, but it's inevitable. So there's this scene in West Wing where there's a like a cartographer lobbyist or a few of them who come in to try to meet with the president, and they meet with the staff first. And they're pitching an alternative to the Mercator projection, which is the map that we've all seen a million times. It's the one in your grade school classroom. And they point out all the ways that it's inaccurate. They're like, Italy's way further. It's like a different place than you think. Iceland is a different size. Greenland is crazy huge. Like, this doesn't actually line up with reality. And then they present this other map. And it's different. It's the same place, but different. It's more accurate. It's better charted for what we need now, because we're not sailing ships, most of us. Don't need the Mercator projections straightness of lines to follow our shipping routes. We're trying to figure out our relationship to the rest of the world and where things sit from a human perspective. So there's this line where CJ asks, I'm going to paraphrase because I can't quote it exactly, but it's something like, what is that? And the lobbyists, the cartographers say, that's where you've been living this whole time. And I love books that do that for me. I love books that snap it into focus and they go, this is where you've been living this whole time. It just looks different than you expected. Here's a map that is human-centered, that's modern, that's going to reach you where you are and where you want to be. And that can be a lot of different genres. That happens sometimes in memoir, that happens in history, that happens in journalism, that happens in parenting, anything that gives you that moment of going, oh my gosh, I thought I was here, but actually the whole place is different than I expected. So you asked for specific titles, and I think maybe I can mention what came out or is coming out this year. And that sort of gives an overview. So the first book I worked on that came out this year was Zeke Emanuel's Eat Your Ice Cream, which is just a really fun but deeply knowledgeable look at what really matters for health and longevity, and cutting through the noise of all these very long books that say, take this obscure supplement and do this like weird form of exercise, but actually looking at the research and giving you the news you can use, bang for your buck. Like, we all have limited time and funds. What can you do that really matters? So that came out in January. Then a wonderful book by a journalist named Betsy Rubiner, who kept a diary, still keeps a diary every day for decades, who became really interested in why people keep diaries and how they're used. And the book, it's called Our Diaries Ourselves, and it talks about the art of diary keeping, kind of the psychology of diary keeping, but also the historical significance, where a lot of the time the only records we have of women's lives or of marginalized people's lives are these kind of private and personal writings. So when there's an official account that leaves out the day-to-day lives of people, we often turn to diaries to really understand ourselves. Then came a book called Drained by a wonderful sociologist named Leah Rapaner, who's a professor at University of Melbourne. And she was looking at the sociology of mental load and helping women really, especially working moms, really wrap their minds around, what do we mean when we talk about mental load? A lot of people think about it as list making or executive function stuff, but it's so much bigger than that. And her research really delineates the different forms it takes and gives us a methodology to think about, where are my mental energies kind of leaking out accidentally versus where can I plug up those gaps so that I can reserve that capacity to expend in the things I really want to do, whether that's your own professional goals or something for your kids or a financial goal, whatever that is, giving a toolkit that's backed by research for how to do that. Then came, Through Mom's Eyes, a wonderful parenting book from Chanel Jones, who has been interviewing the moms of celebrities. She's the co-host of the Today Show. She's been interviewing celebs' moms for years and getting these amazing stories about how to raise kids who can achieve their dreams and what literally, what did you feed them? But also, what were the rules in your house and did your kids have to do chores? How did you handle discipline? Just trying to kind of discern a pattern or a set of resources for success. And I love that book so much because it's great storytelling, but it comes from Chanel's own curiosity as a mom about how to raise her own kids. And that curiosity kind of becomes, I'm a mom too. And I she's asking the questions I would want to ask, like, hey, Lady Gaga's mom, we all know that she was bullied because she's talked about what was that like when your kid came home from sixth grade saying she'd been stuck in a garbage can? How did you deal with that? How did you help her? And I'm just capturing that like heartfelt stuff, but
Mm,
also practical stuff on the page. Um,
yeah.
and I've got a history coming out later this month called Ortiz's War by the former CIA museum historian, Nick Reynolds. And it's
Mm.
about this unbelievable Marine. He was in the French Foreign Legion, he was in the Marines, and he led this campaign to help the French resistance. And it's the story of that action. And then what am I missing? Oh, then after that is my only cookbook. I did a cookbook. Well, it's really an entertaining guide and cookbook called A Year of Jewish Joy, and which is really beautiful. And it's about hosting for the holidays and welcoming people into your home. And then last, but
Great.
definitely not least, is a book called The People's Paper, which is a history of the New York Daily News in its capacity as the nation's first tabloid and the kind of progenitor of tabloid journalism and populist media that we're all still living with today. That was probably more information than you wanted, but I love all these books and I could talk about them all day long. But I think it offers a pretty good overview, which is running across genres, really smart people who are passionate about the topic they're covering, doing a deep dive until they bring up gems that can speak to readers and that they have this kind of infectious curiosity.
So, you want to tell us how you came to specialize in nonfiction, and do you miss representing fiction, or how does that? Is there some secret reason why you're? It's very rare, isn't it? I think it's very rare for an agent to specialize in only nonfiction, or am I wrong?
I don't know. I mean, I have a biased source because I work with several other agents who do, and that's why I do. Really, the truth was not a grand strategic plan. I think it was that I had excellent mentors who did that and had a lot of support here for that kind of how do you develop a nonfiction proposal? Who are the people that you need to get to know? Who are the editors who do this kind of thing? And it turned out I love it. So I don't know that if I had, before I started doing it, I don't know that I would have chosen it. And I'm really glad that I did, in part because I love working on proposals. I think at this point in my career, I can kind of see through the matrix. Like I've seen so many of them. I can notice patterns in what they need and help authors who are bumping up against stuff for the first time that I see every day. But also, it means that I kind of reserve reading fiction for myself, and I get to read novels without my editorial hat on, just as a reader. And I know a lot of colleagues who can struggle with that sometimes. It's hard to kind of clock off if they say do what you love and you'll never work a day in your life. But the flip side of that is, or are you working all the time and you lose being able to lose yourself in the
Yeah,
recreation version.
interesting. Okay, well, we're going to get to the proposals in a minute. Dara's got some great advice, so hang on, everybody. You also specialize in projects with potential for international success. So I'm really curious how you gauge potential for international success with a proposal coming in the door.
Yeah. So there are projects that I don't think will travel that nonetheless are worthy, and I want to do them. I don't know that some of the American history books I've worked on. I go in thinking this probably won't speak to readers in other countries. Not all of them. Some American history does, but the projects that feel universal or global to me are the ones that are about universal things. They're about human bodies and brains. They're about emotions that we all experience. They're about problems that we're all trying to solve. And the thought process there is, how do you bring those pieces out and make them feel really evident so that an editor who's looking at a proposal from an American author doesn't immediately say, this is too American. I think the framing for this is not going to speak to my readers. So I find that my background in international rights has been such an asset in building that in from the ground up. It's something I talk to every client about who could possibly sell books abroad. Not just from a marketing position, but I think it's really easy to get blinders on about international experiences. And it is a huge asset, not only to the marketability, but to the thought process in a book, to think, okay, what perspectives am I not including that I could be? Is there a study that was done elsewhere that actually speaks to the thing I'm writing about? Or is there a story or an example that I could be pulling in?
Dara, you're breaking up. I wonder if is there another, could you maybe move a little bit, or because you're very blurry and you're breaking up. I don't know if the audience is seeing that, but for me it's coming in and out. I don't know.
Hmm. I'm not sure. I'm on the office Wi-Fi, so I'm not sure. I could try
Yeah.
to change to
Okay.
my phone hotspot, but I think that might be.
Okay. All right. We'll just power through with it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Most of the time you're okay, but it starts to wiggle off. Okay, so before we go into the nitty-gritty of book proposals, I wondered if you could just comment on any big changes that you're seeing in the book industry that especially you're coming to us from Washington, D.C. You have a view from the nation's capital, which is a strange place right now. And
It's weird.
I just wonder if any of that or anything else, conglomerates, AI, any of that is infecting the book industry in ways that people who are submitting manuscripts right now should know about.
Yeah, a couple of things. So I've started asking people, I started asking authors who are coming to me, or even people I'm reaching out to disclose any use of AI upfront. Not because I think it's disqualifying in every form, but because I need to know upfront. It's such an evolving thing that it's useful from the jump to know, okay, are you using it for research? Did you use it to as an editorial tool in some way? Where and some people aren't using it at all. I don't use it very much. The only thing I have found it helpful for, and not on a consistent basis, but sometimes it can help me surface comps I might have missed otherwise, comp titles.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
so I've used it for things like, hey, can you tell me about books published in the UK on this topic, or just markets that I might otherwise miss. So that's one thing on the author agent side. Um, on the publisher side, I think what I'm hearing is that the nonfiction market altogether is soft, is down, and
Really?
has been for like a year-ish. But last year, I was hearing that prescriptive nonfiction was still working, and that seems to have taken a turn too. And the theory seems to be that people are turning to AI for advice. Now,
Mhm.
I think that's probably an overgeneralization. I think there's still an appetite for advice from people you trust, that it matters where the advice is coming from. And I have a lot of faith in working with experts who really, really know their field. I mean, that's my bread and butter, not prescriptive necessarily, but working with people who are knowledgeable and passionate about the thing that they're writing about. And I think that still has value for readers too. And publishers are going to see that and continue to see that. And I've seen that. The books that I've had hit the New York Times bestseller list this year have been experts delivering, actionable insights, drawing from their own expertise. But I think those are some of the trends that the nonfiction market is still kind of grappling with. And then another one is in memoir, where for a long time it's been tough for non-celebrity memoir to break through, unless you have a really robust platform somewhere, a hit podcast there are these sort of like micro celebrities that have really engaged audiences. But it's tough for people who don't have that to break through, and it's gotten even tougher. I've definitely seen books that maybe a publisher was taking a chance on 2 or 3 years ago. They've come out recently into this market and they just can't get the oxygen. So it's tough. Like, I understand why publishers are nervous about taking those on. I love memoir. I'm a memoir reader among many other genres. So I think that's a trend, not like a permanent shift. These things come and go, but that's definitely something we're hearing.
Is nonfiction soft relative to fiction? Does that mean that fiction's doing better than nonfiction right now?
This year.
Huh.
So it's, we've seen this, right? So like the 2016 era, 2017, as people were trying to figure out what the heck is going on with Trump, with this political climate, they were turning to nonfiction to explain the world. And we were seeing fiction sales soften. And then there's been some of this. And I think recently my theory, such as there is one, my theory is information overwhelm, whether that's from AI or from news or from social media. I don't know. But I think a lot of us are walking around feeling like the amount of information being thrown at us exceeds our meaning-making capacities. And fiction is great at helping people make meaning out of what is going around them without overwhelming them in like detailed new information to keep track of. And there's some nonfiction that does that too. And that's the stuff I love to work on. But I think it's a symptom of this kind of like, our funnel's too small to handle all the stuff that's coming at us. So we want books that help us with that filtration, that help us not just like get more details, but make sense of them and incorporate them into some kind of improved understanding of the world. And then escapism, right? I mean, it's not a coincidence, and I don't think, that we're seeing like a lot of romantasy, a lot of escapist fiction. Like, that stuff's working.
Yeah. I also worry, that the proliferation of Substacks is part of the problem. I mean, especially for nonfiction, there's just so much information that you can get on Substack that eclipses actually at least the drive to go out and buy the books of the very people who are on Substack to sell their books. It's kind of a catch-22
for
thing.
sure. And I've heard that concern about podcasts too. But while respecting the concern and while understanding the ways in which it can contribute, like, I'm a earnest cheerleader for books as a format. I think there are things books can do that no other format can do. And matching, there are things that shouldn't be books. There are things that should be Substacks. There are things that should be podcasts. But the things that should be books, that are book-sized ideas, that are book-shaped ways of storytelling, I don't think that Substacks or podcasts or any of the other media forms are going to impinge on that in a kind of long-term way. It's really, we have panics about people not reading cyclically, or not being able to engage deeply in thought with things cyclically. And we're deep in one of those cycles. And I don't know how long it'll take to get us out, but I really am like a cockeyed optimist about the future and value of actual real books.
Great. Well, we need you. We definitely need you, especially if you're representing us. So let's get down to the nitty-gritty of the nonfiction project for people, starting with, at the very beginning, your advice on how much of a nonfiction book needs to be researched and written before you even start thinking about querying and doing a proposal. Is there a rule on that?
So I will always ask to see a proposal when I'm signing someone, but also if I've reached out to them, or if they're early in the process. It doesn't have to be fully fully polished. And I cannot think of any instance. This may be specific to me. I cannot think of any instance where I've gotten a proposal in and said, yes, this is ready for submission. I don't need to do anything with this. I'm just going to hit send on my list of editors and get it out. I've never done that. I would be overjoyed if someone handed me a proposal that was so crisp that it required that there was no room for improvement. That would be thrilling, but it has not happened to me. So I would say for nonfiction, you need an idea and an argument that feels really clear, and a platform that has two elements, which is, why are you the person to talk about this? And how are people going to find out that you're the person to talk about this? If those three things aren't here, then I can't sell that book.
What do you mean by how can people find out that you're the person to tell that book? You mean having a platform, or?
So when we talk about platform, I think it's a very useful term, but it does kind of elide the difference between authority or expertise and reach. It combines those things. And there are people who have big reach, but they don't have authority in the thing they're writing about. And that doesn't really work. And then there are people who have authority, but no way to reach their readers. And that's really hard too. So you need both legs of that. I guess a stool doesn't have three. You need both sides. Both sides of the grid. Both sides of the platform on which to actually stand. I mean, when we think about what a platform is, it's a place to lift you up so other people can see and hear you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. In my experience as a ghostwriter, and I've, between my own books and the books I've ghosted, dozens of nonfiction books, but an awful lot of the time, either I have a complete first draft that didn't work from somebody, or I am working with my agent on a project and he keeps saying, write another chapter before we go, write another chapter to make sure that, this thing. Do you find that most often the writer actually has to, and I also find putting book proposals together, just from my perspective, you practically have to write the book in your head. And the book because you can't say what's going to be in the book if you haven't kind of laid out the book. So, I mean, it's the cart and horse problem. That's what I meant in terms of how much of it you think needs to be done before the process of selling it starts.
So, that's sort of it's a separate but related question. So when I'm evaluating something that's incoming, what I'm looking for is those things. Is there an argument that's legible to me and I think will be legible to readers, and a set of questions that are interesting that the proposal answers, or at least illuminates. Maybe the question changes along the way, but that it answers something that we want to know. And then that platform question. And the reason I always break down platform is I think when a lot of people hear platform and they think social media followers. And that's not what that means. There are people that I represent who have had successful books who do not have huge social media followings, but they have a way to reach their intended audience and respect from that intended audience. They're visible and carry that authority. When it comes time to what I need to sell a book, I need a book proposal that lays out that stuff up front and then breaks that down chapter by chapter to show how that argument is constructed and builds cumulatively over the course of a book, and how that narrative momentum continues so that we feel one chapter leads to another. And we have each chapter has a distinct identity and purpose. So you're not saying, what is this doing here? And you're getting something from each one that keeps you turning pages. So one of the most common problems I see is something I call the examples of a phenomenon problem. And I have sort of a silly way of explaining this, which is, imagine you were going to write a book about sandwiches. And I now feel nervous about using this example because I actually have a friend who is writing a book about sandwiches, but his book does not have this problem. Just a disclaimer. But the and this example predates him deciding to do that. But anyway, so you could write a book that's essentially just a listicle. You could write a book that's like, is a burrito a sandwich? Is a grilled cheese a sandwich? Is it right? And just coming up with a list for each one and debating them. But those chapters don't have a relationship to each other. Now, if you put them in an order from like most, a BLT to a quesadilla to a Choco Taco, right? From like most platonic ideal sandwich to least. All right, maybe you're starting to develop a thesis of sandwiches. But it doesn't really come together unless you tell us why you are the person to be talking about this and what you want us to take away from it. So I don't want to read that book unless you tell me, hey, I am an agricultural expert who's going to talk about why the development of government subsidized wheat is key to understanding how America embraced sandwiches and the controversy around practices with real estate exclusions, applying or not applying to burritos and all these other wheat-based things. And here are some court cases that are relevant to that. And here's what that means for our future. Right now, that's a weird, interesting perspective. That's not just a listicle. There's an argument, there's momentum, and there's a reason that person is writing that book. Mm-hmm. So the place where people most often get caught up or stuck is they'll notice a series of interesting things that they want to untangle, but they can't quite find yet. And it takes time to do. It takes uncomfortable, like flailing around time to do, to figure out, okay, what is the angle of approach to this that's going to make it feel like more than the sum of its parts, that's going to make it feel, again, book sized and book shaped, something that couldn't just be a podcast or a series of articles or, a listicle from, like a BuzzFeed article from 10 years ago.
Yeah. It's what I call the abiding question. It's the question that gets in your head and you can't live until you've written the book that answers that question. And I think it's necessary for every book, but certainly for nonfiction, it's absolutely essential. So let's say somebody has a project, they think they're ready to go. They think they're the person to do it. They've got their core question. And so the first step is to send you a query letter. What are the essential elements of the query letter? And do they have to have the proposal to go with the query letter at the same time? Or what do you look for there?
Oh, I think more is always better in terms of like closer to get as close as you can to the thing we would be sending to editors. And I'm able and willing to do some polishing and development for projects that I can see the potential of, but it's going to be easier to see that potential the closer it is to submission ready. What goes in the query letter? Well, there's a ton of advice online about query letters, and I think nonfiction specifically, you got to drill down on why you're the person to write the thing that you're writing, right? Even if it's memoir, people will think, well, I'm the expert on my life, of course. But why are people going to pick this up over every other book? The thing that we wrestle with so much as people who care about art and creativity, and I have not met anyone in the book publishing business who's there because they're like extremely mercenary commercial creatures. Like, this is not the industry you would go into for that, right? Like, those people are doing private equity. They're not here. They're the people who own anyway. It's knowing that the thing you're making is both an expression of a creative and an artistic expression, and also a thing that is intended for an audience. So you have to find a way to get it to that audience. And the mechanism that traditional book publishing has for getting it to an audience runs through having to have them buy it for $30 in a hardcover edition almost all the time. So if you want to photocopy a zine, you can do that. But traditional book publishing has like an established business practice for how we get the ideas to the people. And that means you have to figure out, is my book the right fit for that, by answering the question, how and why are people going to want to pay $30 for this in hardcover? Not like, is it good in an abstract way, but how do I get that into people's hands? And over the hump of like, we all have limited hours in our day and limited dollars in our wallets. Why this and not that?
Is that the most important thing in the query letter? The marketing pitch, would you say?
Um, it, I don't, marketing pitch, I think, is not how I would nickname that. I understand why you're saying that. I think it's like, what is the,
I guess
what am I
what's
offering?
the difference
Why am
between
I?
the query letter and the proposal? So what does an author have to put into the query letter that then they can unpack in the proposal? But you know, I know so many people who are struggling with this. Like, what do I put in the query letter? I mean, it's all there in the
Yeah.
proposal. How do I, so
Yeah. I think, I mean, the shorthand for that would be what you're offering to the reader. So I don't need to know the whole story. I don't need to know uh, the the kind of inciting incident necessarily, or even what the inspiration was, unless that's tied into what you're offering. But I need to know, if you put yourself in the reader's shoes. I mean, we could talk about it in terms of a marketing pitch, but I think of it in terms of like having the emotional intelligence to put yourself in a reader's shoes. What do they want from this book, and what are you offering from them? What are you offering to them?
Mhm.
Is it a new
Mhm.
perspective? Is it, hey, you think the world is this and it's that? In what way is it that shift? What are they going to take away from this? What's the so what of the book? And putting that really front and center.
Right. Um, so you've told me you often see proposals that are great stories, great writing, but they lack that so what proposal. Do you want to drill down a little bit deeper into what that is
Yeah, I
from
think
your
that's
point of view
that's
in the books that you've seen? Yeah.
that's a place that people often get stuck, which is related to what we were talking about before. And that can happen for any number of reasons. That can happen because someone is just so passionate about the research they're doing that they want to include everything, and they're having trouble figuring out what their rubric for inclusion and
Mhm.
exclusion is. That's why you need an argument to come front and center, so that you can use that to decide, well, is this furthering my argument? Is it illustrating something really important? Or is it sort of something that maybe is a better fit for an op-ed or a social media post, or something that's going to complement the book's launch and publicity, but doesn't actually have a function within the book itself? Sometimes I see this especially in memoir, where someone just like has to tell a story. They have to write it down almost as like an exorcism. They have to get it out on paper to understand what's happening to them. And that doesn't always mean it has to be in the book, or that it should be in the book. It's something that's emotionally resonant and important for them, but not always legible for the reader, or core to the other things they're trying to do, artistically, with the character arc or the discovery journey that they as a character are on in that book. So I have a kind of shorthand. This is my proprietary cheat code, where I ask I ask people to fill in the X's, Y's, and Z's in something like, most people think X, but my research or story shows that Y. And once we understand that, we are able to Z. And it's that last piece that a lot of people struggle with. That's the so what piece. That's uh, that's the difference between sharing like a fun fact and developing a thesis that you can build a book on.
Mhm. What changes? I mean, in fiction, it would be the there's the original normal and then there's the new normal at the end, and that Z is like the new normal that a nonfiction book opens up for people, I think. Yeah. Interesting. Very interesting. Yeah. Um, some other common mistakes. You mentioned something called the least charitable reader problem. What's that about?
Oh yeah, that's a phrase I borrowed slash stole from a wonderful editor at Avid Reader who was using it to talk with an author I represent, who I think is going to talk to you in a future session, and I hope everyone tunes in because she's just a brilliant author. But the least charitable reader, or the LCR, is it plagues a lot of people, where writing, and it can happen in almost any genre. It's most common, again, in memoir, but it can happen anywhere, where you're just imagining that person who's like disagreeable and uncharitable to your work or to your life as a devil on your shoulder, and writing for them, or writing around them. With memoir, it could be, oh my gosh, my sibling or my mom or my ex-boss or whatever, like they would hate it if I told the real story. So I have to write around it. I can't tell what really happened. So I have to find sort of a different story that doesn't quite fit to explain something similar. And then it doesn't hold together and make sense. Or it could be, I have to over-explain myself, again, in memoir a lot. I have to over-explain myself because I can hear this voice that is always disbelieving me, this person in my life who has always undermined my own understanding of my own story. And I have it in my mind that I have to convince that person. In other kinds of nonfiction, I see this with academics writing for a popular audience sometimes. They've been trained in this way of communicating with other academics, where there's a kind of like, this isn't a question, it's more of a comment. You got like that kind of, that guy. I used to go to academic conferences. So like, we all know that guy. If you've ever been to an academic conference, maybe some writing conferences too, but there's always like that guy who stands up and is like, well, actually you forgot that at the end of Two Noble Kinsmen, this one side character says one. So there's another instance of like, thank you so much for that contribution, right? So if you get too hung up on what that guy is going to say at the end of the conference, you're just going to get in your own way. And you're going to, again, probably over-explain, right? So there's sometimes people really cling to jargon or specific terminology that's not accessible to a general audience. Sometimes it's over-explaining. Sometimes it is focusing on a particular point to the exclusion of other important stuff because this imagined other person is getting in their way. I find it really useful to have a shorthand for this, because it makes it evident that like, this is not an individual. This is so common. It's like very human to worry about your LCR. Most of us have them. And that kind of sheds light, that defangs the whole thing, right? And having a nickname for it, having an awareness of it, is such a strong and powerful tool to get over it, to get beyond it, to go, oh, yep, that's, yeah. I've gotten hung up on my LCR and I don't have to focus on that here.
Yeah, I've written about fear of family often. And a lot of people can identify with that. So, which brings us back to memoir, and I know that the market for memoir runs hot and cold and up and down, and it's always around. But obviously, there are always great memoirs that transcend the trends, and a lot of people who subscribe to MFA lore are memoirists. So, apart from the things that you've already covered, are there any particular elements that make for a great memoir specifically in your experience?
Yeah, I love learning new stuff. And I think that's common. So I think the memoirs that are breaking through that aren't from someone who has a huge pre-existing platform are from people who can teach us about the corner of the world or a perspective that we don't have. Mm-hmm. I think, I was so excited about this memoir that came out last year that I worked on, and is coming out in paperback this fall, called Ring of Salt. It's
I know, and I'm going to interview Betsy. Yeah.
That has this lush, beautiful description of modern life in Ireland and what it would be like to live there. And that's not what it's a memoir that it's about her story with all its ups and downs. And I encourage everyone to read it. It's really beautiful. And she is a writing teacher who has great stuff to say about writing too. But I learned so much about Ireland and the history of the west coast of Ireland from reading that book. And right next to it is a book called Do I Know You by Sadie Dingfelder, who's used to be a Washington Post journalist before the Post did what it did. And her book is about learning when she was 40 that she was face blind and getting sent into this. She was a science journalist, so she threw herself into researching the brain science of vision and visual processing and memory. And I learned so much about my own brain from reading that book. It's stuff that has stayed with me. So I think memoirs that teach you something that stays with you afterward is always going to be such an asset.
Right. I have, in my experience, I have a strange experience because I used to write much more straightforward how-to books. I ghosted them, I co-authored them.
Mm.
And even the psychology books were sort of straight, how to have a relationship, XYZ kind of thing. But then when I was writing Gaining, my second book about eating disorders, I went and got my MFA at Bennington. And the book then became much less of a kind of an over, old school, how to get over eating disorders or, what I learned about blah, blah, blah. And it became much more of a hybrid with a lot of literature woven through it. And
Mm.
it was so much better book because I got my MFA, when I was doing it. I had no idea how much more layered and interesting a nonfiction book could be until I did that. And it sort of feels like the nonfiction world is leaning a little bit in that direction where there is more hybrid nonfiction now. There's more nonfiction that has literary quality. It's not just totally prescriptive. Is that something that you're seeing, or am I just imagining that?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think some of that is part of the discussion with AI, which is like if you want the 10 tips to shrink belly fat book, you don't actually want that book anymore because you're asking 10 tips to shrink, or you're finding it as a listicle, or you're finding. But I think again, it's about something like a book sized idea that there's a theory that comes from somewhere, an argument and a perspective that comes from somewhere, even if it's practical, right? If it's what the first book I did is called, it's a wonderful book called The Self-Driven Child, co-written by a neuropsychologist and a test prep company owner, and they had this like deeply thoughtful, well-researched theory about the single most stressful thing for kids, no matter whether they're wealthy or poor, no matter whether they're all advanced in AP classes or they're struggling to pass, is feeling like they have no control over their lives. And that's kind of a way to understand so much of the power dynamic between kids and parents, of the ways that we can support our kids, and of the techniques that, it's all downstream of this idea that if we can restore to kids a sense of control over their own lives, everything else becomes easier. Now, that's not a parenting tips book, right? That's like a philosophy of how to approach a problem shared by so many people. I appreciate that book. I didn't even have kids when I worked on that book. And I always loved kids. I spent a lot of time around kids. I felt like I was learning even before I had kids. And I think about that book all the time as a parent. It really was, it's a cohesive approach. And the other parenting books I've worked on, I mean, that one came to mind because it was the first one. But I think that's always something that I look for, even if something is practical and how-to-y, that it's got a perspective that makes sense, that is cohesive, that is testable, falsifiable, and comes out on top. And you say, yeah, this makes sense to me and this can work in my life. And I know how to put it into practice. So that kind of hybridness, I think, can really make that element of it more visible, right? Why is this person writing about it? Oh, because they had some experience in their own lives that brought them to that way of seeing or to that piece of research. Oh, we're going to hear about a story about how they implemented it in their own life, or people that they work with have implemented it in their own life. Great, right? That sort of lends credence to the thing and also helps us see what it looks like in practice. So that's a long answer to a short question. But yeah, I think you're right. And I think it's partly the AI thing and partly a very human desire to pair information with storytelling. And when you get that balance right, it just becomes much more accessible to our hearts and brains as a kind of combined unit working in tandem.
Right, right. Well, we're coming up on the end of our hour. This has been fantastic, Dara. Can you tell us a little bit about what people should do when they submit to you? Are you open to new pitches right now? What is there anything particular that you're looking for or would love to see in this particular moment? Um,
Yeah.
it's always precarious because the books that you accept now are not going to be published until 2028, maybe. So I'm always in awe of agents because there's this, crystal ball question. How can you see in the future what's going to sell? But yeah, what kind of memoirs, that sort of thing. Anything that you haven't covered already would be great. And how to.
I mean, I think it all ties back to what we were talking about, which is people who are deeply curious about something that is perspective shifting and life changing when other people hear about it. And they can make that curiosity infectious. They can bring us into that worldview. And they have some way of telling people about it. And again, that doesn't mean they have to be, I'm not on TikTok. I have an Instagram account. I don't use it. I'm not like a big social media person. It really is about how do you reach the people who you want to reach? Because the other trend in publishing that we haven't talked about, but every agent I know is thinking about, is publicists are stretched thin, and we're in a media landscape that is so fractured and so unpredictable that it's hard to get coverage. It's hard to tell people. It's hard for a publisher alone to create the kind of relationships on an author's behalf that's going to get it out there. Now, does that mean it never happens? No, I'm sure people will come in with 50 counterexamples, but those are exceptions to the rule. What we're really seeing is that an author has to build something first for a publisher to augment. And it's frustrating. As an agent, I wish that someone who came in who was just like a talented writer who had never thought about how to get people to read their stuff, I wish that they could come in and I would say, here is the publisher you should work with on that. But the truth is, it's really hard. And even the times when publishers do take a chance on that, like it's an uphill battle to get the book out and into people's hands. And I've never met an author who was like, oh, I just want a book deal. I don't care if anyone reads the book once it's published. Maybe they exist, but I've never met them. So setting yourself up for success, not only in like landing an agent, landing a book deal, but being able to actually reach people, reach readers, figuring out how you're gonna get to them and how they're gonna get to you.
Mhm. And so are you open to submissions, open to queries right now? And how should people approach you?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I've never closed to queries. I understand why people do it. I think there are times when my turnaround time is slower or faster, depending on what else is going on. But yeah, I'm open to nonfiction queries. I love hearing from people who are like, I am the expert in this thing. And that could be because you did the research, at some laboratory yourself. It could be because you got obsessed with a story that hasn't been told and you did a deep dive because you're a journalist or because you just got to be in your bonnet about something. But having the unique knowledge and having a reason why you think it's going to matter to people that's evident on the page, I'd love to hear from folks. And I have people just include. I mean, the submission instructions are on the WME page, but I tell people to just include the proposal. Cuts down on the back and forth. I'd rather see it all up front. We don't have to. Saves you time, saves me time.
And if it's a memoir, do they need to have a proposal or what's the submission process look like for memoirs specifically?
Yeah, I think it's tough to sell memoir on a full manuscript. Again, like people will point to exceptions. I think editors are stretched thin too, and being able to show them here's the value proposition of the thing, enough writing that they can get a sense for what it would be like to read the book, right? But I've had a lot more success with memoir on proposal than in a full manuscript because you leave them wanting more. It's really hard on a full manuscript to get an editor who is already cramming their day full of stuff to sit down and be able to read the whole thing in one sitting and get that man, I couldn't put it down feeling. It's a really high bar to do that for 400 pages versus, 60.
Yeah. So the it should be the standard kind of proposal with a synopsis, the chapter breakdown, the author's bio, the comps, and like the first three chapters, something like that.
Yeah, I don't even know if you need three. If you've got, I tend to want a meatier chapter outline so that we can really get into. And people ask me about length all the time, and I don't like to give page counts just because that's not how I'm calculating. I'm seeing if it's can I see what you're doing? Can I see what the argument is on the page? Right in this chapter, I'm gonna show you something that's of value to you, and it's really hard to demonstrate that in less than maybe a page and a half, a couple of pages per chapter. So I tend to use meatier chapter outlines. And if you do that, you probably only need one or two
Okay,
sample chapters, uh, plus a
fantastic. Okay,
robust.
terrific. Okay, I think that does it. We are at the top of the hour. Dara, thank you so much. Thank you, everybody who's joined us. This video will be posted tomorrow at MFA Lore, and it'll have all of Dara's wonderful takeaways, and I'll have a link to your site, Dara, so people can know directly how to reach you. And I think that's great. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Dara,
I
and
appreciate
have
it.
a great day.
Take care.
Bye.